Anyway,
It's
let's
not good.
talk. All
Okay.
right. Well, I mean, it's a good day here on Moms Moving On when we have Kate Anthony with us again. And we like our relationship started when we were just like wee little people talking about divorce. And now look at us with our books and our knowledge and our experience. But, you know, Kate's book came out almost a year ago at this point, and it really answers the age-old question for people, should I stay or should I go? And as coaches know, at least good coaches, will never give you that answer, but they're going to want you to come to that
Yeah.
realization on your own. And that's something this book does. But we're going to get a little deeper than just talking about should I stay or should I go? Kate, thank you so much for being here. There is something that comes up in your work time and time again that I think is so important to discuss.
Mm.
And that question is this abuse? Because
Hmm.
that example of the frog in boiling water,
That's right. That's exactly it.
and I'll let
That's
you give it.
exactly it.
Also, thanks for
Oh,
being back.
yeah. So thank you for having me. It's always so good to talk to you, and I love you. And yeah, I mean, I remember when we met, we were I'll never forget, like we were doing we had you on our pandemic podcast that we were doing with Ben Helfond. And then in the
Yes.
middle of it, I think you emailed me, you're fabulous. I
Y-
was like, ditto.
Yeah,
And
I
we've been
think back
friends ever
then
since.
we were all kind of just
Mhm.
like starting out in this world of
Mm,
really being upfront with everything that has to do with divorce and kind of talking about things nobody else was talking about yet. But I get the question all day, every day, should I stay or should I go? And I'm like, there's
yeah.
someone else for that. That's her name is Kate. Go that way.
Come on over. Thanks, love. I appreciate it. Um, what was your original question?
So, no,
Your
talking
original
about,
question.
it's
Yeah.
amazing to me how many women that I start working with as clients, and in telling me their story, they're like, holy shit, I can't believe that happened to me. And I can't believe I just said that out loud. And that sounds really bad. I'm like, well, because it was really bad.
Because it was really bad. And that's what it really is, an exercise in when I want an exercise I'll often give clients, or, if I'm not necessarily talking to them, or if they just, write to me or something, they say, these are all the things that are happening. I don't know what to do. And I say, read back what you just wrote.
Mm.
Read back what you just wrote as if a friend was telling you, if your daughter came to you with this, because objectively what you just wrote is horrifying. Oh, the frog in water. That's what you were. That was the original question, the frog in water. Um, and it is the frog in water analogy is that if you boil a pot of water on the stove and throw a frog into it, it will jump out really quick. It'll fly out. But if you put a frog in a pot of cool water and then you turn on the heat very low, the core body temperature will continue to adjust until the frog ends up boiling itself to death
And
or
how many
being
of us have
boiled
been
to
that
death.
frog without even realizing it?
I mean, yes, for so long, right? For so long, we are all that frog. And I think we're all that frog in different, aspects, right? Like we're all sitting in this pot of water cooking ourselves on the planet. Like, right? Like,
Fair enough.
sorry, I live in Southern California. Things have been awful. Um, it's nice and cool here now. But really, but in our relationships, right? It's that thing, it's that slow boil that we keep adjusting. We just keep adjusting to this new normal. And then until we realize, I actually can't survive at this heat, at this temperature, in this, relationship. And fortunately, hopefully, most of us are able to pull ourselves out before things get really bad. But, a lot of us are not.
The
Um,
majority of people do not. And I think
mhm.
that's what the issue is a lot of people don't realize that the way in which they're being treated, because it may mimic the way they were treated in their childhood or the way in which they saw their parents treating each other, right? Because that always
Yeah.
happens. We end up repeating patterns. They don't realize
Mhm.
how bad it really is. And it reminds me, I just finished watching this really disturbing show. I'm sure you saw it on Netflix, Into the Fire. Did
Oh,
you see
yeah,
this? With
I did.
the mom who was trying to find her daughter who had been given up for adoption and adopted by this like psycho killer molester, and the wife who stood by him and like
Yeah,
every time had to be told he did something wrong and how bad it was. And she was like, well, I
I love
believe in,
him.
I love him. Yeah. And it's just like, oh my God, how many people will
Yeah,
put aside how
yeah.
poorly they're being treated for this like
Well,
ideal?
right, and, by all accounts, he treated her really well. He was just going out and raping and molesting and murdering, um, other people, but what I thought was so fascinating about that was her empathy, and this is something that I think happens to so many of us, is that we have so much more empathy for their trauma than we do for ourselves or potentially sometimes even our children. Um, right? So it's like and it can read like an excuse, right? Well, he had a really difficult childhood. Well, he has a lot of trauma. And somehow we think that that level of trauma separates this person from quote abusers,
Hmm.
right? We sort of put them in different buckets. There are abusers who are horrifying and dangerous and terrible. And then there's my husband who has a lot of trauma, and so a lot of his behaviors kind of mimic that of the abuser, but he's not an abuser because he has trauma. Almost all abusers, unless they're actual sociopaths or psychopaths, they all have trauma. That's the point,
Right.
right?
Right.
And somehow we separate these. And that's what I think happened in that case, where this woman was like, well, I mean, she was so naive, right? And he, just, I think, love bombed her or whatever so much that she was like, oh, but he's damaged and he's got a lot of damage. And so, like,
For me, she
uh,
was the epitome of the frog in the water, like
yeah,
until she
yeah.
couldn't be anymore.
Until she couldn't, until it was like, "Oh, you actually murdered my daughter."
Yeah, but
You know?
I think, there's definitely a connection between very empathetic people
Mhm,
ending up in
mhm.
relationships with people who
That's
are
right.
inclined to mistreat you. And
Yes.
that's where, when I train coaches, we talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I
Yeah.
think those lines get so blurred, right? Because like you can be an
Yes.
empathetic person without having sympathy, without trying to go in and like fix the feeling and sit with the person in the feeling and feeling responsible
Mhm.
for the feeling versus just, okay, I see that you have this trauma. That doesn't mean I have to tolerate the abuse.
That's right, and that's the main thing is that, we have to have more compassion for ourselves than for the other person.
Ooh.
Because when we have more compassion for them, we continue to put ourselves in the line of their fire, And what we have to recognize is like, yeah, he does. He's a lot of trauma. He does. And many people will go to therapy and deal with the trauma and not inflict it on other people.
Right. And that becomes personal responsibility. Because if we were
Hmm.
all walking around bleeding our traumas out all over everybody, like the world would
Hmm.
be even worse than it already is, believe it or not.
How about that? Right. I mean, and so much of that is exactly what happens, right? And so, um, yes, personal responsibility, right? Like we've got to and holding people to account, right? To say, listen, I get that you have trauma and go away and deal with that. And let me know if you're ready to have like an adult conversation about this, but you cannot abuse me and you cannot abuse our children.
Yes. And I think, as you and I know and have seen over the years in all the types of women that we've worked with, most times the abuser is not going to be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go fix something now. I'll see you in a few months. That's not going to happen. So,
Almost never.
at what point do you see with women that all of a sudden they realize the water's too hot? Like what
Mm.
point is that for them?
Well, I think sometimes it's when their kids are being affected.
Mm,
Right? It was like, oh, he's turning on our children now. Or there's like a tipping point where we think that we're staying for our kids because we want to mitigate and protect and all that, and then we start to realize that actually they have behavioral problems. They're really unhappy, right? I mean, I think for everyone it's a little bit different.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes it's an also tends to happen is that abuse tends to escalate over time, right? Because the water gets hotter, right? We get used to it. We get used to this temperature. Our core body temperature kind of adjusts up to here, and then it's like suddenly it's too hot. Suddenly it's one step too far. And I think we all have a different line, right?
That's true.
Because
We definitely all have a different line, but everyone does ultimately have their breaking point.
yeah, I mean, we would hope, right? And I think that for, some women unfortunately don't. For some, it's when they're dead, to be blunt about it, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the ones who want to get out, the ones who end up getting out, yeah, they do have a line. I know that for some women, it's like, oh, I actually now have evidence that he's cheating on me. Okay, that's my line. I'm done. There are women who say, I just wish he would hit me.
Hmm.
I wish he would hit me because then I would know, like it would be clear to me. And I say, yeah, but do you realize that there are thousands of women out there who are being hit and it's still not enough. Like it's still not clear. And so, because the women who are being physically abused often say that it's the emotional abuse that's far worse, that they can handle the bruises, but it's the psychological torture and manipulation and the gaslighting that is the worst part.
100%. And it really does rewire your brain. And,
Mhm.
I remember in certain relationships that were far from healthy, feeling always like I was the problem. And I'm like,
Yeah.
like really believing it, like leaning into
Mhm.
that. Yes, like I fucking suck and I'm sorry for you, sir, and then like looking back and thinking, wow, how this type of personality was able to manipulate me time and time again.
Yeah.
And, again, it's like you don't realize how bad it was until you're looking back or you're telling the story to somebody else. Um, but yeah, I mean, that breaking point, I think we meet people who have had their breaking points because of the work that we do, and it's sad to think that there's so many who never get to that breaking point. But
Yeah.
it's almost like everyone is looking for permission.
Yes.
Divorce is taboo in many cultures and da 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 and this and that. Sure. On its
Mhm.
own, if you just wake up one day and decide, you know what, fuck this beautiful life, I'm out. That is taboo in so many
Sure.
ways. But still, we look for permission to leave even in the most abusive
That's right.
situations. And I think that's the part that like, people have to get comfortable with is like you don't need to ask permission to save your life.
Mm-mm. No, you don't. And I think it's important to sort of underscore that, the reason you're asking permission for this is that you've been conditioned starting from birth, the way that we are conditioned girls and women is to ask permission, right? We're waiting for them to ask us to dance to the school dance. We're waiting for them to ask us to, on a date to marry us, right? It's like we're always waiting for permission. And we socialize girls to be, very, very mindful, very demure, and
So
right.
cutesy.
And waiting for, them to make the choice for us. And so the idea that we can make a choice for ourselves is really radical. It's completely contrary to all of the things that we've been taught. Um, and also, when you have been systematically cut down and your self-esteem destroyed and you don't trust yourself, right? When you've been the one who's been like, no, 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 it's my fault. No, 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 it's my problem. No, 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 you're right. I do have a lot of work. This is what my husband used to do all the time. He used to say, you know, um, you, yeah, I know that you're right. I have to work on that thing. And, I'm sorry I did that. But,
But
you
you,
really have a problem with X, Y, and Z. And
yes.
I thought we were doing the 50-50 dance. Like,
Hmm.
okay, he's going to admit his faults and he's going to go away and work on them. And and I hear what he's saying, and we're in a partnership, and his experience of me is this. And so I'm going to take my part and I'm going to go and I'm going to work on that. And I thought that's what we were doing. That's not what we were doing. It was a deflection.
Uh-huh.
He would admit, he would cop to like the front 5%. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That's not okay. But really, you need to. And then I would. And so then it was like, well, obviously, I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing. And so when that's who you've become, to sort of wake up and be like, wait a minute. Like, that's a big leap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It takes
Yeah.
some.
And the more that happens, the less you trust yourself for sure. Cause it's like,
Yeah.
I'm just the crazy lady reacting to somebody's poor treatment. And my reaction was too big. So there must be
My
something wrong with
reaction
me.
was too big, and it's because of my childhood, and it's my therapy work that I have to do
Hmm.
because I'm not. I mean, yeah, and it's like this. It's like like a spiral. It just keeps, you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so to pull yourself out of that spiral, right? To go against the current, against the grain, all the way back up, right? Is That's a lot, and it's rarely done alone
Yeah.
without, someone like you, someone like me reaching down and being like, hell no, and pulling them through, back up.
And I love the metaphor of the spiral, but I will say it's almost like when you pull the suction plug out of the tub,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's like all of that was the hardest part, like that release, and now everything is just going to flow, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no doubt you can make your way back up the spiral. It's just pulling that plug that's the hardest part in the beginning.
Yeah.
And for all those reasons, but if we go back to, is this really abuse?
Yeah.
What is your definition? I mean, we know what physical abuse is. We don't need to talk about that, but what is your definition and what does your book highlight in terms of, hello, this is abuse. You don't have to put up with
Yeah.
this.
So emotional abuse is, it's a pattern of behaviors designed to have power and control over another person, the most sort of simply put.
Hmm.
Um, and the dynamic is always one of power over.
Hmm.
In a healthy relationship, you've got two people who are coming to the table openly, honestly, right? Equally. Nobody's trying to one up the other,
Right.
right? But in emotional abuse, it's this systematic,
Ugh.
uh, and that's the hardest part, is that it's systematic, right? So it's like, it starts small. It starts with like, oh, I don't know. I just don't feel comfortable. I miss you. I don't want you to go out with your friends tonight because I really miss you, and you think it's sweet. And then and then it's less sweet the next
Hmm.
time. It's like, well,
Hmm.
why do you need other people? Why do you need to go out with your friends? Don't I give you everything you need? What are
Hmm.
you missing here? Right. And so it's like slow and creeping, right? The frog in the water.
Yeah.
Um, but it really is this dominance and power over, but it's masked. The problem is that it's masquerade. It's like masked as other things. It's masked as
Hmm.
love, right? Um, and so that's why it's so much harder. That's why it's so much more difficult to recognize, to understand. But he loves me. No, it's not. That's not what it is. It's just that he loves me so much. Or it's just that, like, he has abandonment issues because of the way that, his mom would go out every night and like get really drunk. And so it triggers him. So I need to help heal him.
Yeah.
And we learned this in couples therapy, by the way. This was like, the premise of imago therapy is that your partner makes behavior changes in order to help you heal your childhood wounds. Like, literally, that is the premise of imago therapy. So if my spouse has abandonment issues because of his mother, then like, I'm going to heal his wounds by not abandoning him. And he's sort of saying what he feels abandoned by. So I have to comply with that. Like, we learn this in couples therapy
Right,
if you go
right,
to
right,
therapy, right?
right.
Um, so that's why it's so insidious.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of times I guess from programming and conditioning, we're being the good
Hmm.
wife. We're being good by being
Right,
obedient and
right.
and making our spouse happy and doing what it is that makes them feel the most comfortable. And
Hmm.
that's, I do think also a part of abuse is someone who allows you to fully lose yourself and who you are and doesn't say like, okay, well, what do you need? What would make you happy? Because we're not in a relationship just to serve one person. And I don't know. I think for
Yep,
a lot of
that's
us,
right.
it takes that first terrible experience, that first marriage that goes awry to realize
Mhm.
we were doing it all wrong. We were trying to fit some sort of like stereotype of like wife that we saw in the movies or something.
That's right. That's right. And we think, and because we've been taught like this is what a good wife does, right? This is what this is, and so much of this is based on servitude and like subjugation, but it's what we've been socialized as,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
And then
Ugh.
us terrible women come to our senses and realize I
Right.
don't I don't need to take this anymore. And I love what you said in the beginning about like if my child came to me and said this is how they were being treated, like what would we tell them? And that's always such a powerful question for my clients. Like, would you want your daughter to be in this type of relationship? Or
Yep. Yep.
because the more she sees it, the more she's gonna end up more likely to end up in one just like this.
That's right. That's right. And that is, um, that's always, I think, one of the most clarifying questions we can ask. If your daughter came to you and told you that this was what was happening to them, what would you say?
Mhm.
And usually it's like, boom,
Right, you throw yourself in front of a moving train for your child, so
a
no brainer.
hundred, 100%, 100%. Um, I, the thing that's also really shocking is that nearly 50% of all relationships experience lifelong emotional abuse by an intimate partner,
Really? I didn't know
which,
that number.
mhm, yep,
Wow.
yeah. Um, and, and it's because it's so hard to identify, you know, um, that because of the gaslighting that it
Mhm.
creates, you know.
Do you think in all of these situations, the abuser is intentional in their abuse, or it's just the patterns that they've developed? I mean,
I think that's a really hard question. Like, according to Lundy Bancroft, right? Like they know. They 100% know. Um, I don't think it's as black and white as
I
that.
don't either, and I'm glad you agree because these are
Eh,
often the people who are the least self-aware in how their
Well, right.
behavior affects other people.
That's right. Look, if you're dealing with someone who is actually a narcissist, right? Which I think there are more of than we may know, or right, because it's not, we're talking about the spectrum of
Mhm.
narcissism, but
Mhm.
somebody who is, displays narcissistic personality traits. Um, at the end of the day, these are people who have a single focus, and that is getting their needs met.
Yes.
And often it is filling an unfillable hole that was created during childhood,
Yes.
right? It's their childhood wound, and it's created a gaping hole. And all they can think about is trying to get that hole filled.
Mhm.
And so they're not necessarily thinking what I'm doing is destroying others because of the narcissistic kind of fracture in the brain, that sort of their desire to get their needs met completely overrides any sense of empathy or understanding of how those behaviors might impact anybody else in their lives.
Mhm.
And so, they're cheating is because they're just trying to get that love. And you haven't provided it because Number one, you can't. You have, but you can't fill it, right? It's like no matter how much you love them, it's a bottomless pit. It's going right out of them. They don't feel the impact of it. And so they have to go find it somewhere else. And somewhere else, someone else presents themselves that's newer and they don't know you and they're not annoyed by your whatever,
Or
by the hour you
bullshit.
take in the bathroom or
Right.
whatever. Um, or, my ex-husband used to say, I love this. Is my favorite thing is that, and he still says this sometimes to our son. He'll be like, "Yeah, but your mom just doesn't have, she doesn't have any sympathy left for me, or your mom is just like she doesn't have a lot of compassion for me." And I'm like, "Motherfucker, you have literally sucked me dry of compassion for
Right.
25 years. Like
Right.
I am the most the idea that I am don't have compassion,
Right.
that I am not sympathetic human being is
Well,
like
it's that never
absurd.
enough. It's the never
Right.
enoughness. Yeah.
Right. But also like, yeah, I actually have a limit now. But during the marriage, like I was considered cold and unempathetic because I couldn't fill it, right? But then you meet somebody else and they are like, "Oh no, your wife doesn't understand you. I understand," right? And like, of course that right. But the point is, he's not thinking about how that's affecting me. He's just thinking about like, this person over here is just, they're my savior.
Right. Right.
So I don't know. Is it intentional? Eh. Do they know they're doing it? I think they don't care
Right.
or they
Right.
don't have
That's
the
true.
capacity to care.
No, they
Right.
don't have the capacity to care. And I think, it's true what they say that hurt people, but that again is where the empathy and sympathy come into play. And you have to know the difference between both. Like it's one thing to say, okay,
Mhm.
they're behaving this way. They have this wound because of the neglect or the abuse in childhood. And also I don't have to take it. It's a
And
both end.
also,
Right.
that's right.
Um, I first of all, just thinking back on these 30 minutes we've been chatting, there's been the frog, the spiral, the hole, the bottomless hole. We've
Yeah.
used so many like
A
euphemisms and
lot of metaphors.
metaphors, a lot of
Hmm.
them, and I love
Yeah.
them, but it's all very much speaks to process. And
Hmm.
being abused in a relationship isn't always very overnight and overt. It can be a very covert process, just like coming to terms with the fact that it's happening, just like coming out of that relationship. So it's all process. And the D word is a driving force behind the process.
Yeah.
Um, how have you seen this book change lives, making the ultimate decision about someone's marriage?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that what I set out to do with the book and what I have heard that it does, so thank God, is that it's really direct, you know, with a lot of compassion, right?
Mm,
So I am not browbeating anybody and being like, how could you possibly stand for this? Blah, 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 right? Because I've been there, I've done it. I understand it. What it does is it lays it out for you. It lays it out for you in a way that is um, compassionate and loving and kind and really clear,
I think we all need
right?
that in our most browbeaten times where we just don't even know which end is up anymore and if the
Yeah.
water is in fact too hot. So I'm so glad that we could have this conversation and open a little bit, open more eyes. And I hope that those eyes now go look at your book because you are so good at what you do and you have such a great way of, like you said, making somebody feel seen and heard and understood and also getting them to understand
Yeah.
what's happening here. So for
Yeah.
everyone out there, the D word is available like anywhere books are sold. It's beautiful, it's empowering, and it's honest, just like my friend here. Kate,
Thank
thank
you, my
you.
love. Thank you so much. I love and adore you. Thanks for this conversation.
Likewise, and look at us both showing up in pink. Two babes in pink. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for another conversation, and we will see you next time on Mom's Moving On.